I must have missed Maryland. The Terrapins were 8-5 last year, 4-5 in the conference, a 7-5 regular season. They beat NC State in the Mayo Bowl. Back-to-back bowl wins for the first time since 2002, 2003 for Mike Loxley's squad. And this was a team that played the heavy hitters in this division really well. Remember, early season, they lost to early last year, lost to Michigan by 7. Kept that game against Ohio State pretty close. Buckeyes did end up winning by double digits, but it was a close game in the second half. Josh Gaddis takes over at offensive coordinator. He inherits one of the better quarterbacks in the league, Tulia Tagovailoa. Tua's younger brother threw for 3,000 yards, 18 touchdowns, and completed 67% of his passes last year. Over 8,000 career passing yards for him at Maryland. Terrapins got to get better on the defensive line, 119th in the nation last year in sacks allowed. And it's a wide receiver core that loses Raheem Jarrett. They lose Jacob Copeland. You bring in West Virginia transfer Caden Prather and FIU transfer Tyrese Chambers. 6 players logged between 300 and 600 passing yards. So kind of really spreading the ball around for Tagovailoa there. Lucas, I think Maryland, establishes itself right now as the 4th best team in this division. Crazy to think that the 4th best team in this division has a 7.5 over/under. But I think Maryland can make a little noise here. Wouldn't surprise me if they knock off one of the 3 teams above them. What say you about the Terrapins?
Yeah, I think, one, you have to give a lot of credit to what Mike Loxley and that staff did, especially when they took over that program after the mess that was DJ Durkin and the Jordan McNair situation that had happened there. This was a program I don't think a lot of people wanted to take it over, especially considering the competition that you have to play year in and year out in the Big Ten East. But no, and I think the reason why they're at 7.5 is I think there's a gap between the first 3 teams in the Big Ten East. Then there's Maryland. And then I think there's a big gap after that with 5 through 7 afterwards, too. Because you mentioned they have an experienced quarterback. You make an argument that Talia's, at least right now, is probably the 2nd best quarterback in the country. They have almost 1,000-yard rusher Roman Hamby coming back. I do worry a little bit about their offensive line. They got to replace 4 guys who started 10-plus games last year. Defensively, you mentioned kind of should be able to spread the ball around. They did lose Raheem Jarrett and Deshaun Jones, but like you said, they're probably going to find guys to throw the ball around to, especially with the transfers that they did bring in. And then defensively, they have to replace 2 NFL defensive backs in the secondary, and Jacorian Bennett and Deonte Banks, who was a first-round pick. However, they did get one of the best corners in the transfer portal in Jaquan Shepard, who from Cincinnati, who was first-team All-American Conference. Linebackers are all back, too. So they should be good on that side. Defensive line did have some losses, but they did bring in a couple of transfers. I just think they're headed in a really, really good direction. And you mentioned, or we talked about like their schedule, too. Yes, they still have Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State on the schedule, but 2 out of those 3 you mentioned before, they took them down to the wire. And that's why, kind of similar situation to last year, they played Ohio State, second to last game of the year, in College Station, took them down to the wire. They have that same type of game this year against Michigan, who could potentially have a little bit of a look ahead. So I still like Maryland, despite some of the losses that they have in the trenches, which worries me a little bit. But I think overall, I think Mike Loxley has this team moving in a really nice direction. I think this is going to be, I think at minimum, they get back to a bowl game, and I think it's another solid year for the Terps. And they're bringing back one of the best jerseys in college football. The font Terps is going to be their official jersey this year. Could not be more excited.
It's a really nice font thing. I think the schedule sets up really well. One of the things I wrote down on my sheet was, besides the big 3 teams, right, besides Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, where are the good offenses on the schedule, right? You look at the non-conference, it's Townsend, Charlotte, Virginia at home, Indiana, Illinois at home as well with Penn State and Michigan. On the road, Michigan State, Ohio State, Northwestern, Nebraska, Rutgers. You look at the first 5 weeks of the season for Maryland, it's Townsend, Charlotte, Virginia at home, at Michigan State, Indiana. Maryland could realistically probably should be 5-0 before they play at Ohio State on October 11th. You mentioned the ending. They Second to last week of the season, they'll host Michigan, then go at Rutgers to end it. The over-under win total at FanDuel is 7.5. Even odds both ways, -110. I'm going to take over 7.5 wins. I think this team returns a lot on offense. You mentioned Roman Hamby, 989 rushing yards. Also returned Antoine Littleton the second, had almost 400 yards. Top two rushers are back. Your quarterback's back. I think you have 3 wins in the non-conference. And I think you can get 5 wins in conference. One of them should be Northwestern. At Rutgers, at Rutgers and at Northwestern, those are the games you want on the road, right? You want Penn State and Michigan at home. You want Rutgers and Northwestern on the road. Michigan State early, as we'll get to next. I'm not too high on Michigan State. That team lost a lot, especially on offense. Get them in September is a coup. So I'm taking over 7.5. I think this could be an 8 or 9 win team for Mike Locksley.
Yeah, I'm with you too. 7.5 over. We were high on Maryland last year too, and their number was really low. I think it was like 4.5 or 5.5 last season. And like I said, I think the talent that they're bringing in too, even though they might have to replace more on the offensive defensive line, I just think they've recruited really, really well over the last couple of years, a few top 30 classes. So yeah, I'm over with you on 7.5. I think 8 or 9 wins is way more realistic than 7.